This is Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley. I'm the fellow who has a hyphen in my name. The hyphen is silent, but I am anything but that. In our normal inclusive manner, we have this morning Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley, the voice of Respectonomics, and Sarah Benton, co-host. And the reason why I say that it's inclusive is we have no idea what time you're listening to this. Now, it's our morning. It's a beautiful Canadian morning, bright sunshine, although I have to admit there's some nasty stuff in the air, which apparently is the smoke from Manitoba.
Yes.
In all other respects, good morning, Sarah.
Good morning, Jeremy. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, everybody. I've got a fairly dramatic opening to this conversation this morning, and I want us to visualize a ship that is sinking in the middle of the ocean, laden with people, laden with cargo. And as you look at this ship and you realize it's going down, you ask yourself, I wonder what went wrong. What is, it doesn't appear to have hit a rock. It doesn't appear to have been caught in a storm. What is going on? And it doesn't take long to look more closely at the name of the ship. And the name of that ship is leadership. We are dealing today in a world where leadership as an entity or as an object or a prize is failing. And the proof of the pudding is that people today have very little respect for leadership. Leadership is considered to be self-enforcing, self-building, and in many respects seems to be uninterested in the people who are reporting to them. And I say that
there's almost an ego to it.
Well, there is. And I'm going to be careful how I say all this morning, Sarah, because part of me says this is time for a dramatic look around at leadership. At the same time, leaders themselves know that they're in a world where they are being harpooned day and night, whether it's in social media or the press, wherever it happens to be. So they become, understandably, inured to that, and they can't hear it. So I want our approach this morning to be at least gentle, but at the same time to be firm, resolute, and to discuss what is going on with leadership today that we need to, frankly, that we need to fix.
Yeah. And in the background, I think it's important to remember too, in terms of from a leadership standpoint, leadership is often being directed by others as well, right?
Absolutely. Yes. But when you are a leader and you are in charge of your ship, that is your responsibility. And it is in that corridor that I want to aim our comments this morning.
Okay.
The first one I want to address is this, that the concept of leadership is divided between two groups of people. It's very tribal. 10% of the world, tribally speaking, wants to be leaders. 90% want to be followers. And there's nothing wrong with that equation, and we can mess around with the statistics. But broadly speaking, if somebody wants to lead, that's fine. If somebody wants to follow, that's fine. What you don't want is the two confusing with each other. If you're meant to be leading, get at it. If you're meant to be following, stay with it.
Right.
That's the first thing. The second thing about leadership is that the vertical approach that we've got today, by vertical approach, I'm talking about the hierarchy, the pyramid, exactly. That look that just says, I'm on top and somebody else is middle and somebody else is at the bottom. That basic structure, that vertical structure has failed. Now, it used to be a very successful model. It's based on a military model. It's based on a naval model. Since we've just talked about ships, we could use that example. But here's something rather interesting. If you see the captain of a ship and he walks into your office, you tend to stand up. You tend to take note. You tend to be deferential.
Right.
And the reason for that is because the captain of a ship has earned his or her stripes. They have been ratings, they have been sub-lieutenants, they have been on the lookout, they have been up all night. They've done everything. They've earned what they are. So one of the things with leaders today is you have this uncanny feeling they haven't necessarily earned the right to be a leader, to
Mhm.
be the captain. So that in itself sets up a paradigm where you don't get the automatic respect.
Right.
The thing about the captain of the ship is because he or she knows all of the ins and outs of every item on that boat, whether it's the nuts and bolts, whether it's the rudder, whether it's the sails, whatever it might be, that captain is familiar with and does his walk around all the time. You've seen it in many movies where you see the captain of the ship talking to the ratings, talking to the people and,
Right.
whatever they're doing. But there's a talk around. That doesn't mean that the captain will give orders. The
Right.
captain will go to the person responsible for a particular area and say, you better have a look at this. This cargo's going
Right.
loose or something.
They're submersive
Yeah.
within the
Yeah.
groups, yeah.
It's a brilliant combination. But the thing is, in leadership, so first of all, I think there's this issue of earning the stripes. But the other thing is this: leadership can be divided into two, what I call factions. One faction is leader, fine. And the other one is the manager. And you and I can be brilliant managers, does not mean that we are necessarily brilliant leaders. And there's nothing wrong with that. But
Right.
again, how often have you seen in business somebody manages very well and is then put in a place of leadership? That
Right.
is not necessarily correct. And just because somebody's not a good manager doesn't mean that he or she won't be a good leader. As a matter of fact, when somebody's not good at managing, sometimes they make fabulous leaders because they know what they are not good at.
And I think part of the piece that's missing is, like, I think we've talked about this before, where a lot of the way in which individuals are promoted within a company from doing phenomenal at their job or at their role or their responsibility. So they're hitting all those benchmarks or hitting,
Yeah.
doing things, excelling at it. And we take those individuals and we automatically put them into a leadership role based on their success in their prior role, but we're not
Exactly.
providing them with the skills. They may not have the skills or the tools or
Mm.
the resources to be effective leaders.
Well, let's talk about leadership in and of itself, because the
Yes.
world desperately needs leadership. And the starting gate to leadership is, first of all, it needs to dignify the people who are reporting to the leader.
Mhm.
This isn't a talk down opportunity. This is a talking up opportunity. As a matter of fact, the finest leader of all is the one who believes and exercises servant leadership. And you know how I love my Latin and my Greek?
We do.
Okay. Okay. Here we go, though. But it is important. Leadership, the word ship means, in fact, it's not Latin or Greek, it's an old Norse word, and it actually means to be creative. So
Mm.
not only does the leader need to be the one who talks with me, not at me, but he also has to be, or she has to be, creative. And you know something? There's a lot of leadership today that is not creative. It's
Right.
responsive, it is reactive, I think is a better word, but it doesn't actually have its head in trying to do new ways. Now, this leads to a central point. Sam Walton at Walmart, in the old days, he would visit the stores every twice a year. That in itself is significant because I think most of us are very aware of organizations where you do not see the CEO or the president. And
Right.
that, by the way, applies just as much in politics. You need to be walking around and talking to people. It's that straightforward.
Visibility.
Absolutely.
Visibility and access.
Yeah, that's all there is. It's very straightforward. And Sam Walton used to stand in front of all of the assembled organization, running from the person who was with the broom through to the person who was organizing inventory. And his question was always the same. We know what we're doing right because the numbers tell us that. Tell us what we're doing wrong.
Mm.
And I am throwing down the gauntlet that when a leader or an organization or a political group is unable to ask that question, what are we doing wrong? Tell us. That organization is not in true leadership.
Right.
The reason is because the human being is fallible. The human being is fallen. and the human being will fail. Those are three dynamics that we can be guaranteed in all our mortal coil. So for a corporation or a political group or any kind of community group to say, oh no, well, we just don't make mistakes like that is ridiculous.
Right.
And the favorite one that I get back is, oh, we don't ask what have we done wrong because that's negative, which is a thought that absolutely buffaloes me. I can't get to that. But then they will say, but tell us where we can improve. Well, the truth of the matter is, if you're doing 100 things, I will show you 100 things that can be improved. It will always be the case. It's not exactly a novel insight. And not only that, Mr. De Bono, Edward De Bono, who wrote the book, and he's no longer with us, but he wrote the book on lateral thinking. And one of his most brilliant insights was you get somebody who's digging a hole and they make the hole absolutely beautiful. It's cylindrical, it's smooth, the edges are contiguous. Everything is right about this hole in the ground. You can't fault it for all the tea in China. There's only one problem. The hole is in the wrong place.
Mm.
So what is the point of improving something that is in the wrong place? The question of tell us what we're doing wrong is honest, it displays fallibility, and it draws people in. You'll always get the risk that when you ask the question, somebody's going to get beefing on about 100 things that they think are wrong. You're always going to get that. So you can put in a certain degree of boundary. You can say, let's agree that we're going to hear one thing from any one individual. We can deal with the practicalities, but the excuses and the reasons for not doing it, frankly, are not acceptable. And when you look at an organization like Walmart, for all its sins, the fact is what they do organizationally is brilliant. They allow many, many products to be brought to many, many people at very competitive prices. They haven't changed their direction, really, model at all. So that's one thing. The second thing is this, though. If we're going to talk about vertical leadership and say, no, we need horizontal leadership, we need the Edward De Bono approach where you think laterally, you think across, in other words, one of the most powerful tools is for the leader to draw alongside the employee or the subordinate or whatever you want to call that individual. If the politician draws alongside me, that in itself is a very powerful message. They walk alongside you. How is your life going? Tell us how your day is going. How is your family? But start drawing alongside and moving away from this sort of top-down, we know what we're doing approach.
Mm-hmm.
I think drawing alongside people is a very powerful tool. And as you draw alongside people, somebody will say, oh, but doesn't that risk familiarity? Well, it's a bit like railway tracks. Railway tracks are actually separated and there's a one on one side, one on the other. So you keep your distance.
Right.
Those railway tracks work because they go alongside.
Well, and I think it engenders trust. And
Absolutely.
when you have trust, right?
Yeah. Trust is an interesting word because if you ask people today about leadership, they will tell you basically they don't trust it. The reason is the leadership, as I say, has been working from this elitist, self-interested perspective. It's most unusual for a leader, whether it's political or it doesn't matter. Let's not get into that detail. But the detail I want to get into is how many people have climbed the ladder because they want to do it for themselves, not because they have some passion that they think they can spread to other organizations and people.
Right.
In other words,
from a place of service.
Exactly. Back into the servant leadership. And there's another thing here that I think is crucially important, and that is when people draw alongside you, that is your best opportunity to become transparent.
Mm-hmm.
One of the worst things that happens in business and politics today, and you see it all the time, oh no, we can't talk about that, it's confidential.
Right.
Well, no, it's not usually, for a start. And usually that confidentiality is camouflage or smokescreen for we will let you know when it suits us.
Right.
So you deny that inclusiveness. If you want to be inclusive, and that's a buzzword these days that seems to go around and around and around, why not include people? Why not say, let's be part of the decision, be part of the solution? This is what we're trying to do. What do you think? I could never believe how many times in business that a new initiative would come along with all its sparkles and bells and whistles, and it truly had never been tested. They had never actually
Right.
gone and said, this is what we think will work. They never actually came. My whole 51 years, never once did I get the question, tell us what we're doing wrong, tell us what you need. I never got that.
Right.
And I think you've commented on it, that your experience with surveys, which have the little boxes that you tick,
Mhm.
they are very good at ticking boxes.
Right.
That's
And
what,
very good at sending out the survey
yeah,
and implementing it
yeah,
and making sure that it's completed. There is a sort of a surface follow-up afterwards,
yeah,
but then it falls off the table.
right. Now, I want to summarize this in two ways. The leadership issue is essential that the leader starts drawing alongside of the people. I think we've beaten up on that.
Yes.
And there's a couple of reasons for doing it that are critically important. The first one is that as you get to know your people and understand their trials and tribulations, it may be because the dog was up all night, whatever it might be, people need to know that, understand it, and to draw alongside again.
Right.
Because when I draw alongside my employees or my voters or whoever it is, when I draw alongside, I am going to expand my understanding and deepen my understanding of my market. In
Mhm.
other words, the customer, the shareholder who's part of my market, the supplier on whom I depend. So paying attention to your employee, as a very specific example, is in fact a microcosm of how you pay attention to the other constituents in your business.
Right.
Now, lastly, if we're going to do this, if you're going to draw alongside another human being, we have said repeatedly under Respectonomics that the whole principle is to dignify the other person. That's what we're trying to do, is to restore, to restate the
Right.
human dignity. But one of the things that I have found is understanding people isn't an easy task. People are very complex. People come from very different situations and so on. And if you talk to a therapist or people in the psychological world, they will explain this in far, far bigger detail. I think leaders need to be far more aware and attenuated to how people operate, how people think. And in other words, you often hear of there's a psychologist on staff to help people through their day-to-day difficulties and problems, which is great. But I think that same source of psychological support needs to be manifested in the very concept of leadership, that the leaders begin to understand or try and understand the complexities of how people operate themselves. Because understanding that complexity will then give you, me, all of us, a better idea of all our constituents, which of course is the customer, the shareholder, the
Right.
supplier, all of us.
And an imperative component, I believe that should be part of leadership is emotional intelligence.
Yeah, yeah,
When you break it down, we don't have time in this episode, but when you break down the components of what makes up emotional intelligence, if leadership was engaged in that process or had an understanding of that process, it's hitting on exactly what it is that you're
yeah.
speaking of.
Well, it's very important because understanding the emotional intelligence is part of understanding why does somebody decide to buy a six-cylinder car instead of an EV? And a lot of those decisions are psychological and not based on rational, fundamental, foundational thinking. Economists work with this all the time, trying to figure out why do people change their minds? Well, because the human being is complex and the human being is fickle. But the more that we can understand one another and allow ourselves to understand one another, enable each other, in other words, I think we will create a far more prosperous union in the true sense of where people work together. And
Right.
I want leave with one comment, Sarah, and
Mhm.
that is, if we get leadership working the way we're talking, where they're drawing alongside us, where they're trying to bring us, they're being creative, dignifying us, bringing out our hidden talents. How often have you found that somebody says, have you tried this? And you find out you can do it. And
Right.
it's so exciting when that happens. So, what would happen if you have a work environment or a political environment that is exciting, that it is stimulating, it encourages innovation and productivity and loyalty? It's well worth it. But the leadership needs to get off the vertical platform and to work on the horizontal.
Absolutely.
I rest my case.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you, Sarah.